Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another session in our Liebling Research Lab. This is part of our Layer 2.0 competition that we're doing in Tel Aviv, and it's dealing with the building additions that we have been doing for so many years. And today I'm very excited to have two professors or two lecturers actually from the Techion, Nir Mualem and Eyal Salinger. And we are going to deal with the whole economic side of conservation today. I mean, we cannot not note that Tel Aviv was declared as the most expensive city in the world just this week. And there's always this debate if conservation or the process of conservation that we're doing is in some sort of a way affecting the price of those rental buildings and in general also the just the cost of living in Tel Aviv. So without further ado, I would like to invite Nir Mualem to start with this talk today. We'll have 20 minutes of each of them, and then we'll have a joint conversation. And I'm also inviting you to write in the chat if you have any questions or comments. We can address them later. So please, Nir.
Okay, good evening. I'll try and share my screen. Let's see, share screen. Okay, do you see the screen?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a bit about a tricky subject today, which is the macro effects of heritage conservation in general and in Tel Aviv in particular. I'm head of the Planning Policy Lab at the Techion. Part of my research is heritage preservation, actually the legal aspects of heritage preservation. I'm going to give you a few bites from global research on the issue. Now, let's see if this moves forward. Okay. So we're talking about statutory planning and statutory plans that designate, earmark actually, buildings for protection. Okay, so we asked how does heritage preservation affect the city, even a nation? Okay, so mostly we have findings from global research. We have some findings from Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and Eyal will elaborate on these furthermore after I finish my talk. It is kind of problematic. I think that Israeli policymakers have not assessed completely the economic impact of heritage protection on the macroeconomy of Tel Aviv city. Perhaps it is because it is very difficult to do. Perhaps because it is time consuming. Perhaps some people don't really want to know the overall impact of heritage preservation. I don't know the reasons, but that's a point for further research. Now, when we talk, you probably know how heritage protection looks like in Israel. If you don't, this is just one photo that encapsulates part of it. You have flexible preservation measures embodied in statutory planning alongside very stringent preservation measures, whereas the lenient preservation allows more flexibility to the architects and the planners. For example, the Ein Vered number 4 building that you see here got 1.5 or 2 stories on top of the existing Bauhaus building. But we're not here to talk about the architecture itself. Having said that, because we're talking about a large chunk of the Tel Avivian architecture is modernist architecture. Then modernism embodies the functional approach. This means that at least some share of the buildings in Tel Aviv share this modernist heritage, thereby the ability of planners and architects to mess around with them or actually add floors on top or beneath the building is quite extensive, okay? So When this happens, it has economic implications on the city, on the owner, and perhaps on the state as a whole. So when you talk about flexibility in heritage preservation, you also talk about the ability to make conservation more economic for the owner or the developer or the co-owners, such as in this case, okay? The ability to let them add floors, add housing units, apartments, to increase the vitality, the economic vitality of their refurbishment. You see here Ben Yehuda number 4th Street in Tel Aviv, which also encapsulates relatively flexible heritage protection. Then again, Ben Gurion number 32, added floors. But when you talk about heritage protection, you also talk about costs, extra costs. Eyal will talk about it later on. The debate is ongoing. It will probably continue to rage between developers and the city authorities, whereas developers and owners come along saying, you know, it's more expensive to refurbish a heritage building. The figures are not agreed upon. You know, how expensive is it? Does it impinge on property rights, or maybe there's added value to the plot of land or to the building or to an apartment? This is an ongoing quarrel which affects the city from an economic perspective, and also landowners whose property has been earmarked in statutory plans, and allegedly on the face of it, they incur more costs. Now, we're talking also about a growing industry here of architects, artists, lawyers, real estate appraisers. The heritage boom that Tel Aviv has witnessed in the past maybe 40 years, the heritage industry has become an industry, attracted tourists, but it also affected professionals in the field who have been working as lawyers, architects, specializing in heritage conservation, or in squabbling with the city authorities over preservation. Now, if you're not an Israelis, then probably those photos here don't tell you much. But if you are an Israeli, then, you know, if you walk the streets and you see these persons, and in particular, if you're in the heritage industry, you'll probably ask them for a signature or not. This is a joke, you know. But we're talking about a bunch of architects and lawyers and real estate appraisers, and this allegedly has created an economy of its own, okay? Like in other places worldwide. How much does this economy, what's its worth? We don't know, because economists shy away from looking at this issue. However, we do have findings from across the globe trying to assess the overall impact of heritage protection on the economy of cities and states as a whole. For example, when we talk about the overall economic impact, we talk about, you know, the jobs created, the income generated, the GDP generated, and the taxes that spring out of heritage or the act of preserving certain heritage assets. Now, certain academicians from across the globe have attempted to evaluate the macroeconomic impacts of heritage preservation. For example, a relatively early study in the 90s, tried to assess what happened to the economy of New Jersey following heritage protection. So Listokin and his friends and his colleague have found, you know, that when you put $120 million US on the heritage industry as incentives, as subsidies, and the likes, you generate salaries, you generate income, you generate taxes, and they've estimated these in the figure that you see here that summarizes about 100 pages of a report that they've made in the mid-90s, meaning an investment of $123 million US is generated in 1990 values, you know, 207 million in gross domestic products, 65 million in taxes, and other figures that you can see here. They've also assessed what happens when, when you have investment by heritage organizations, when they invest, or they invested 25 million US dollars in the mid-90s in protecting heritage assets, they actually propelled multiplier effects, and other effects, 1,400 jobs, 33 millions in income, and 43 million US dollars in GDP. So you can assess it. It's tricky. The assumptions of these assessments are not cut clear, but this has been done. Glazer and his friends and his colleagues, Bean and Al, in a recent study, have found that designation raises property values within historic districts, with the exception, by the way, of Manhattan in New York City. What they also find was that properties that are just outside the historic area, they're the ones that benefit pretty much. And I think Eyal will be talking about it later on. For example, if this is a historic district, it means that there are free riders that sort of benefit around the area from the fact that the owners in this area preserve their buildings. That means that there are large increases in property values in nearby properties. When you talk about macroeconomic effects, you can also talk about land use. And Stephanie Ryberg-Webster from University of Ohio, Cleveland State University, a few years ago, she studied quite a bit of cities in the US, and she's actually realized how impactful heritage preservation is on land uses, increasing certain land uses, such as residential or mixed residential buildings. I'm not going to go into it. She's also found, by the way, that heritage makes assets more expensive, thereby less affordable to large populations, large shares of population in the city. Like you can see here, I don't have time to go into it, but this is again Ryberg-Webster's data. When Maccabi and Alan Gould, 5 years ago, they studied New York City, they also found other macroeconomic effects, meaning when heritage comes in, you get gentrification, you get more households earning more money, less diversification in race, based on race. And that means that usually higher income families move in, lower income families, at least in Manhattan and New York, go out. So I'm not going to go into these details. If you wanna, I can send you the data later. And now I'm going to zoom a bit or give you a very short preamble into Tel Aviv. Now, as I said, there are very little to no assessments on the overarching impact of heritage preservation on the economy of the city. However, when you look at the museums and cultural centers and shops and tour guides and the hotel industry that has been booming in the past 20 years, you get some indicative measurements about what the heritage industry here, and it is an industry, has done in Tel Aviv, okay? If you've been to Tel Aviv, you know the Barrow Center. I don't have any economic breakdown or data on their earnings, but I can only assume that until 2020, they've been gradually increasing. They've been selling whatnot, heritage related wall watches for only $135 US. So I can only assume heritage has an impact. Unfortunately, it is hard to assess. Time magazine has also nominated Tel Aviv as one of the best cities in the Middle East to visit, earmarking the Bauhaus architecture as number 5 in things to see. Then again, few studies, very few data collected on what it does to tourism, except perhaps the data of the tourism master plan from 2020, when the municipality of Tel Aviv and the Ministry of Tourism approached tourists in the last few years, they've tried to assess why they come to Tel Aviv, how many of them come to Tel Aviv, and where from, okay? Now, the data is also inconclusive here. 70% went to Jaffa. Jaffa is a very old historic town. Does it mean that they went there to see heritage, or maybe eat in one of the most prominent shakshuka restaurants in Jaffa? I don't know that. But the numbers are indicative because tourists do say that they come for a tour. 26% have come for to tour the city, and when you tour the city, you see probably the White City, which is, by the way, ranked 27 out of 280 things to do in the city. But you also see Old Jaffa, which is number 2 and filled with heritage assets, okay? So I invite you to study this issue further if you're into doing a PhD or a master thesis, and I'll be more than welcome. You're more than welcome to discuss this with me. But when you look about economic effects, I can also point to what we have here, a sort of local tax called the value betterment levies. This is a form of value capture tax that allows the city authorities to capture added value, which means that if I have a property and it gets some additional value, it is, there's an uptick in its value owing to statutory planning and owing to it's being designated as a historic website. If I do develop this site and as a result, I earn money, then I have to share 50% of my enrichment with the public throughout a form of a local tax that we call betterment levy. So you have these taxes pouring into the city. Is there an overarching assessment of how many taxes the city gains out of heritage protection? No, this is another issue for research, and I apologize that I cannot be more elaborate on that, but this is just one example that I'm going to give because some of the data is not exposed to the public. When you look at Allenby 114th Street, which is an eclectic style architecture building, which has gained a floor and a half, there was a squabble between the developer and the owner, okay, on the amount of money that the owner gained because of heritage designation. The city said, yeah, you've been, there's a value uplift of 1.3 million shekels divided by 3.5, you get the dollars. Whereas the owner said, no, there's only a 200,000 shekels uplift that I need to pay for the city. Overall, at the end of the day, an appeal tribunal ruled that the betterment is 1 million shekels payable to the city. Now, this is a not so large money in relative terms to the entire budget of the city, but 1 million shekels, like $300,000, is used for diverse purposes like infrastructure improvements, educational purposes, buying of land for public use. So it means that heritage does have an impact on the economy of the city and its ability to actually plan, make improvements in the city, and it does not need to be in the vicinity of the heritage property. It can be in the entire city throughout these local taxes. On the obverse side, and I know that Eyal will be talking about it, so I'll conclude with saying this. While heritage has had surely a macroeconomic impact, we've seen just 1 million shekels in tax payable to the city because of one plot of land that earmarked one building. Please note that in Tel Aviv, there are thousands of plots of land that are being developed or will be developed or have been developed, inclusive of heritage structures, okay? So it means that the heritage-related gains are quite immense, but we shouldn't be too happy about it, depending, as long as we're city officials, because the Israeli system, the planning system and the legal system allows to sue government, local government, for diminution in property values, which means that if you claim that your property has been devalued, you can file a lawsuit to the district court, to the appeal tribunal, and then the district court, suing the government for impinging on your property rights, your constitutional property rights. And you get these kind of squabbles like in Bialik Street a few years ago, where you have the owner of this building saying, well, you earmarked the building, I cannot build anything on this urban villa. 22 units of housing went down the toilets. And so you have to compensate for this. 22 units, housing units that I cannot build are worth more than 20 million shekels. So he sued the government, the city, for 20 million shekels. And like him, there are dozens, or if not hundreds, of other owners who've been suing the government for additional diminution. What can be done? Eyal will be talking about this, but I'm just gonna give you a few, tastes of what's to come. Incentivizing owners. The city can and has incentivized owners in order to dodge these diminution in property values lawsuits, but also to allow property owners to do something with their heritage assets after it was designated. For example, it allowed transfer of development rights into towers like the one that you see here. It has allowed towers all over the city to expand by moving development rights from heritage plots to these kind of plots. It has also allowed additional bonus rights. I don't know if this is a good example, but it is just overlooking the sea. You have this beautifully eclectic building that, had bonus incentive zoning, and, you have this huge hat on top of it. Is it good, bad? I don't know, but it helps the city face the economic implications of designation. That's it for now. If you have any questions, my email is here. Thank you very much. I'll stop share now.
Thank you, Nir, for these very interesting insights. Yeah, I'm wondering, Eyal, if you could give us some more detailed answers, perhaps, for the real estate prices, and maybe how really conservation affects properties de facto. Like, if I conserve my building, will I be able to get more rent out of it, or how does it really work? And does the system prove itself to be good for the city or bad for the city? Or does it depend who you ask? So please, yeah.
Okay. Okay, now it's okay, yeah. Okay. So I will try to answer some of these questions at least. So hi, so my background is I'm an economist, real estate appraiser, and a doctor for urban and regional planning. And this presentation, parts of it is based on my PhD on the Techion, supervised by Professor Daniel Scheffer. And the title of the PhD is actually the title of this presentation. So I will try to answer some of these questions, and Nir helped me a lot here. I mean, preparing for that. So, okay, let's first I want to define what we are talking about. What is the good we are talking about? What is the problem, and how we try to solve it? How did Tel Aviv try to solve it, and did she succeed or not? It's I don't know if you'll get an answer for that. So we are talking about building designated for conservation. As you can see, those should be conserved. And in public economic, it's this kind of good is called a mixed good. These buildings, most of them are privately owned buildings. And it's a mixed good because the private owners, he should produce the bear the cost. He should conserve the building, but so he bear all the cost of conservation, but on the other hand, he doesn't enjoy all the benefits. Some benefits are private benefits, but some of them are public social benefits, and he doesn't enjoy all of them. So it causes kind of a problem which we will define later. But first, we want to talk about a little bit about the costs and some of the benefits, and then see how we can deal with it. So, what are the costs of conservation? Nir mentioned some figures, but the figures are debated. You can hear very high differences. But in general, I think everybody agrees that if you have to preserve a building compared to just renovating a building which is not designated for conservation, so then you have an extra cost, an additional cost, surplus cost. We debate, there is a debate how much, but there is no debate that there is. And why is that? It's because of building materials are more expensive. You need skilled labor, construction techniques. You can see in the picture, if you want to build the underground parking place, look what you need to do. And it's time, conserving a building, it's a longer process, more criticism, and the local authority is more involved. Therefore, it takes time, and time, we know time is money. Another restriction, important restriction on building designated for conservation is that you can't demolish building designated for conservation, which means that you don't have the option to demolish. Even if you don't want to demolish today or in 5 years or in 10 years, losing the options to demolish has some significance, and these are the costs that we in conservation. Now let's talk about some of the benefits, not all of them, and you mentioned some. We talk about some mainly related to the building. So private benefits, Sharon mentioned. If you, it's expected and it's seen likely that if you, of course, conserve your building, so you will get an added value, a premium to the price of the apartment, also renting. But we in residential, we usually look at selling prices. So if you invest so much in conserving the building, you will get a higher price, a premium. Of course, the question is whether this premium is higher than the costs, but this we will try to see later. Now, let's talk about some of the benefits which the private owner, the one who conserves, doesn't enjoy. And one of them is positive externalities, Nir mentioned. It is like in the case which Nir showed in Manhattan. Usually, if you are in a conservation area with many buildings, in a concentrated area of building designated for conservation, of course, if they were conserved, it's more conserved. Then you enjoy a premium, a positive externalities, even if you are not designated for conservation. Like you said, the free rider, the area prices could rise due to the conservation area and concentration of buildings, and this is one thing. And another social benefit that I like, and I would like to mention, is the option value. It is important for us, and I can feel it myself, that we know that this heritage exists, even if we don't go every day to see the Bauhaus or every week or every year. The fact that it exists, the fact that we can see it whenever we want, the fact that our kids, the future generation, can see it, it has a value. I'm sure probably all the people here are willing even to pay just to keep it for the future generation to see it. So what is the problem? We saw, as we said, there are some costs, that additional costs that the private owner has to bear them, but it does not enjoy all the benefits. There are positive externalities. In these cases, there is like an economic market failure, and we need government intervention. And this is actually the thing that the big question is, I mean, we need incentive, and the question could be downloaded for one thing. Are the incentive efficient? Are there enough incentive to cover for the cost of conservation? This is actually the question. But first,
sorry to disturb you. Can you please make your screen full screen and lift your head a little bit, because we see you only from the nose. Thank you.
It's not full screen?
We can see the, all the symbols of your computer. So it's just a bit, if you could just, sorry to disturb you. But if you have time, I don't think this building is actually a new building, I think, no?
Just a second. Now it's better?
Okay. Yeah, that's perfect.
Where were we?
Next one, and just lift yourself up a little bit if it's possible. Thank you.
So we were the problem. Okay, so we were talking about incentives, and I would like to define incentives and then to see what actually Tel Aviv did. So there are two kinds of incentive. We can say there are direct market-based incentive, which are like grants, loans at preferable rates, tax incentives in general, and of course planning incentive. Nir mentioned transferring development rights, different uses to the building and things like this. There are also indirect incentives, which their aim is to create positive externalities. These incentives are the local authority or the government. They invest in conserving local buildings, not private-owned buildings, in the conservation area. They improve accessibility or infrastructure in the conservation area, promote it, or do some administration in order to promote the conservation area and create these positive externalities. So then we ask, we want to see Tel Aviv, okay? And then we ask, which incentive should Tel Aviv use, and to whom it should be aimed, to entrepreneurs or to private owners. So we have to mention here that in Israel there are not national incentives, no tax incentives like we can see in other places in the world. So Tel Aviv, in a way, has to deal with it by itself, and of course, the budget is limited. So Tel Aviv should use direct incentives, because, I mean, first of all, it's a big area, the white city of Tel Aviv. You can't create positive externalities by conserving a building or improving infrastructure in all this area. Tel Aviv has a high property value, and the cost of conservation is high. So therefore, what Tel Aviv did, and we can see in the plan, is market-based incentives. They tried to give specifically incentives for entrepreneurs, for developers, to promote the conservation process. So Tel Aviv Plan 2650B, we have almost 1,000 of building designated for conservation. In the heart of the city, we have another almost 300 according to other plans. And the plan defined approximately 200 of them with severe restrictions. The plan allowed some planning flexibility, some or different uses and some other things for the regular designated building, and for the building designated with severe restriction, the plan allowed transferring development rights, meaning you're not allowed to add additional construction, but you can take this additional construction you could have had and add some incentives, additional development rights as incentive, and sell it to a different plot with the money, you have to conserve the building. A lot of debate about this transfer TDR, but if it's working or not. But it is a main tool for, at least for these 200 more specific buildings. The municipality also gives economic support, grants, or loans at preferable rates. These are actually for the private owners, not for the entrepreneurs, and tries to promote this transferring development rights to coordinate between buyers and sellers. Okay, so Tel Aviv, as I said, use this market-based direct incentive. What else is important? What else is important? It's important the selection of the building, because if you want, I emphasize on these positive externalities. If you want to create positive externalities, you can't just, you have to, the selection of the building will determine it. Meaning, location was a main criteria to decide whether a building will be designated for conservation or not. In Tel Aviv, we have not an all area for conservation, but buildings which designated, near them there could be building not designated. So a location was a major criteria, and they try to make some concentrated conservation area. And also a very important thing that I found in my research, it's the choice of the building. Many buildings designated for conservation have a high exposure. A large proportion of designated building are corner building or with a wide facade compared to their proportion in the number of buildings. I have investigated 2,500 buildings in my research. Designated buildings are in average in bigger plots. And here you can see some maps, but I don't know what can you see for that, but you can see maybe some concentrated designated areas. And in these maps, I show more corner building and building with severe restriction, which are supposedly, let's say, quality of their architectural historical value is higher. More of them are corner building and more exposed. So that's how they try to create economic value to the area. But this way of selecting the building or making this conservation area, they created an economic value to the area and these positive externalities. Now, to try to give some notes, at least, about the big question, are the incentives given in the plan sufficient enough to cover for the increased cost of conservation? So I can say, first of all, positive externalities. I think the selection of the building certainly created positive externalities in the neighboring area, especially in the places where there is a concentrated conservation area, a lot of buildings in the area. Second thing, of course, a premium in a building that were already conserved. But what about the building value itself? So we have to, one thing that I found and we have to understand is that because of the location criteria, because of the selection of buildings also according to location, it could be that entrepreneurs paid for location, not specifically for the designation, but for location. And as Nir mentioned, there is a big debate, betterment levy or planning compensation, section 197. There is a big debate that we want to solve here. In a seminar paper that I supervised, a student, Qasem Sarhan, he investigated 21 decisive appraisals for betterment levy, and 4 building in the conservation plan designated, and he found that 57% of the building of the decisions said that the plan branded the building and gave him an extra value of 5%. Two more things, one more thing before I conclude, is another way that we can see a lot in the couple of years or decades to expose conservation. We want to expose the value of conservation, and a great way of doing it is boutique hotels. That we can see a lot of boutique hotels in the city, in the urban area, built, I mean, in designated buildings. This is one example. This is another. And I want to say just a few things. Why is it so good? Why is it serves interest of both conservation and the urban area and entrepreneurs. So first of all, you know, today the trends of tourism is cultural tourism, to see more culture and to also not just leisure or to be outside the city, but people also want to be in the city, and these boutique hotels really serves this thing because they are, of course, in the urban, in the city, in the heart of the city. Higher exposure, as we said. If we build boutique hotels, people see it, people get in, the conservation is more exposed, creates for sure more positive externalities, and create income, commercial restaurants in the boutique hotel, more income to the area. And for entrepreneurs, it could also be a good investment. Smaller hotels compared to bigger hotels have less risk, usually have higher occupancy and more profit rate. The high cost of conservation we talked about, it's comparable, it's good. Boutique hotels are it's a very high cost to build them. So if it goes by with conservation costs, the fact that you can demolish the building, so you can't build usually parking, or it will be very expensive. So if you build a residential building, you usually need parking, but for boutique hotels, it could be suitable without parking. And maybe one of the most important things is the promotion, the branding of the hotel. It has prestige. It has like a concept, a brand, which helps the entrepreneur promote the hotel. So I will sum up with two remarks. First of all, again, I think I emphasize it, the gravitation, the mass of buildings, the high exposure of buildings, which helps to create these positive externalities, and which Tel Aviv did. And the other thing, which I didn't talk about much, but if it's a market-based plan, if more for entrepreneurs, so we need, in a way, to treat the building more personally, if we want also private owners to conserve them, because there are many problems in one building that are not in the other buildings. I will not get into it. So what I want to say, that incentive might be different from building to building according to its how difficult it's for him to conserve the building for many reasons that I will not now emphasize. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eyal. I personally have a question, just referring to some of the last slides you showed, because when you're talking about like maybe the benefit of doing a hotel or a boutique hotel, I'm asking if this sort of prestigious slogan that we're giving buildings as such is really good for the city or not. I mean, on the long term, because now, okay, there is capital flying in, or maybe not now because of the corona, but sure, the buildings are exposed to tourists and strive through it, but most of the community or people who live in the city sort of, I think, distinct themselves from building as such, because there are boutique hotels with infinity pools on the roof where maybe perhaps in their brains, those buildings from the 30s were a bit more social, and the idea of the roof, the common roof, was something to use together and not to have like an exclusive 5-star restaurant in the bottom of the hotel that if you don't use it, you cannot, as somebody who lives in Tel Aviv, go into the hotel. Plus also that these hotels, they divide the rooms into very small units, and they completely destroy the original function and structure of the building. So I know I'm very critical, but I think that we as Tel Avivians, after really this economist stating that this is the most expensive city in the world to live in, should look at what we're doing with these conservations and look at it long term, and not only, does a building that get conserved or not, and what is the price market of it is a big question. But I'm really also wondering if you think that the way we're doing it now, long term, is beneficial for the city.
First of all, I think that let's say boutique hotels, this is a better solution than Airbnb. Yes? So in that matter, we might solve a small problem.
Do you mean that Airbnb affects the price value of rental apartments more?
Yeah, and I think it's also disturb more. I mean, if I have a boutique hotel near my house, near my building, it's one thing. But if I have an Airbnb apartment in my building, it's another thing. Mm-hmm. This is one thing. Of course, there should be, a mixture. I'm not for boutique hotel. I think boutique hotels, it's good of course, I agree, in a proportion. I don't know about what they do inside in the architecture, although it was written that I'm an architect, I'm not, so I don't know. I'm not really, this is not my profession. But what I wanted to state in this is, if we conserve, we want the value to be exposed. This is one, I think, one of the most important things, and it's important for the economic. So this is also a good way to expose the heritage to more people.
Yes, I'm sure. If people see that a building next to them looks beautiful, they might want to renovate their building as well. But I'm really still asking myself, is the renovation we're doing very punctual for a certain building, or does it maybe benefit the whole city at large in a way that perhaps, sometimes we tend to do over renovations, and then the population that really lives in these buildings don't take care of their buildings because they think that renovation has to be a perfect sort of, physical manifest of what they thought it was in the 30s. But I know it's not your field, so I want to maybe ask you something more specific about the competition we're doing now, because the competition we're doing now is really looking at the rooftops as sort of a playground, no? Because most of the cities' spaces are already built, so this new layer is really supposed to give us a sort of a land to build upon. And just for thinking, like, I'm trying to look at it from your sort of milieu of economics, what do you think would be the most beneficial for the city at large to build upon these buildings? If you could imagine the sizes of the flats and the usage of these flats, what do you think would be best to build upon a building like that? Like if it's a 3-floor typical modernistic building?
First, I would like to say that, again, what you stated before regarding the cost of conservation. So again, it's a matter of incentives, and then the other things that is important is, again, like you said, what will happen in the next time you have to conserve the building. So we have to think what will happen in the second round. This is, and again, it's a matter of money. But for your question, as I see it, I think it should be, it should be in a way the same like the 3 floors. I wouldn't, I don't know if I will go much different.
So like 80 square meters roundabout building flat size, as this is like the typical, I think, modernist building.
I think so. I would go for it. Yeah, I think so. I think this is also what we can maybe afford here or can buy here. Yeah, I would go for that.
Okay, Neil?
But you know, if you want to economically, you probably rather build smaller apartments. But
Smaller apartments, yeah.
if you look at the city, I think this is what you should do.
So you think like smaller apartments or a mixture of small and large ones, just economically speaking?
Yeah, look, economically speaking, it should be maybe smaller apartment, and what they do is the penthouse or the upper floor is the biggest as possible, and they rather have one big penthouse than two duplex or things like this. This is the highest profit for the entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm trying to still decide how to engage this whole problem, because on one hand, the competition we're doing is a very open competition of ideas, but of course, this has to somehow make sense, no? Because if you do socialist, idyllic buildings on top of listed buildings for conservation, and they don't, they're not feasible because of the economic system that doesn't support it, then it's a waste of time. So I'm trying to balance out sort of the question how and how many floors and which size of apartments you should build on top of buildings to make it on one hand economic, but on the other perhaps maybe try and sort of engage with the spirit of time that Tel Aviv is way too expensive and people cannot afford to live here, and you know the flats are rented out totally overpriced. So it's, of course we cannot solve it with a competition, but still I think ideas from your side how to on one hand make it economic, but on the other not to make conservation a process that is sort of dragging us to a very one-sided track of making money out of it should also be looked at. So I wonder.
Can I interject,
Sure.
Sharon? Well, this I think brings about the key question in our statutory planning system: how small is small? How small is a small apartment? And the Israeli law has at least 5 definitions of what amounts into a small apartment. It depends where you are. If you're in the periphery, outside of Tel Aviv, or if you're in Tel Aviv. As a matter of fact, Tel Aviv has certain streets. Mixed-use street, Ben Yehuda, Allenby, in which traditionally speaking, the city has allowed smaller flats because they knew that some of these areas are less prestigious, they're more traffic-oriented. It means that you can bring about more people to live in them, or sometimes maybe people who prefer smaller apartments there. So the city in a well-crafted policy enabled smaller apartments in these traditional, very bustling areas or streets. Now, when you look at in the economic side of additions, say you add 2 more floors to an existing heritage building. Now, what you can do is that if you look at it from an economic perspective, this aligns with what Eyal said. Yeah, a developer would normally want to keep the uppermost floor to himself or herself, because the uppermost floor is the one that is supposed to have the best view, is supposed to have like the least neighbors surrounding it, and so on and so forth.
Then you can't share the rooftop, no? You can't share the rooftop with your neighbors. It's only yours.
Well, unless you split the rooftop into 2 or 3 apartments. Yeah. Now, another strategy, which is not so much socialist, but it still maybe has something to do with balancing the prestigious impact that sort of plagues, some would say, heritage preservation, and that's maybe to plan smaller units. Small units per se are more affordable. small units can be anything between 20 to 40 square meters. And we know that households now in Tel Aviv and in general in Israel are getting smaller because of divorce, because of people getting married not so fast as they used to before. Come again?
Or elderly, or people that...
Or elderly, yeah, or elderly people living as a two-person household, okay? Or one-person household. And so, you know, there are a few studies of Christine Whitehead and also one that we did at the Techion, comparing the sizes of different apartments worldwide. And we know that, you know, apartments can be as small as 15 square meters in certain areas in the Far East. In Israel, you know, you can find 30 meters or 25 meters apartments that can be planned according to the Israeli bylaws. As far as I remember, Tel Aviv city has allowed 30 to 35 square meters apartment in certain sections of the city. So a way to move forward with this is maybe to say, okay, heritage preservation and heritage industry is something that is plaguing the city because it has made the city as costly as we know it has. It is one of the contributing factors maybe that made the city so expensive. So if we want to curb this or slow down these processes or even make heritage structures, heritage assets more in popular demand or more approachable or more affordable, one way to do it is plan small units. That would not necessarily make those apartments ultra affordable based on, you know, I mean, relative to other sections of the city or other neighborhoods of the city, but it will still make them more affordable to those who want to go back into the city and they don't have 5 million shekels to buy a heritage, an apartment in the heritage assets in the city center.
Right, and it will also
I want to just
diverse sort of population live there. No, sorry, Eyal,
yeah, sorry. Just look at what Tel Aviv is trying to do now with affordable housing. I mean, it's not with conservation. With affordable housing, they can do it actually, or entrepreneurs will do it when they have enough profits. They got more development rights, so they have enough profit. So some of the apartments could be for affordable housing, yeah, lower rent and for a longer period. So
yes, this has been done around the world for a lot of years already. You know that some percentage of new buildings have to be affordable housing or social housing, even. So we see that works in other countries.
But for that, you need a much more extra development rights.
That's true, which you cannot have on listed buildings.
Exactly. So it's
yes, but I'm really wondering. I mean, this is what we're dealing a lot with in the Liebling House, that the community that lives in Tel Aviv sort of distance itself from those listed buildings because they are perceived as prestigious and not affordable and, you know, not approachable. And because, you know, a big amount of this urban tissue that we live in is listed in a way, or even if it's not listed, it's a building from the 30s. We really try to see how to make those buildings more approachable, even if it's, you know, taking care of the shared gardens together or the spaces in between, or to make renovations that are not like, you know, where an entrepreneur goes into the building, buys it all off and sells the infinity pool on the rooftop, but rather, you know, that the people can come together that live there and say, okay, we just need to fix the plaster that falls down or take away the holes that were drilled for the cables again and again and again. So like there is, for my, what I see is there's either like a very expensive renovation or a total neglect. There was like nothing in between, no? Which I think is also a bit problematic. You talked about tourists. I think the tourists that I always go through with around the city, they always ask me that, like, why is there such a, you know, gap between those listed buildings that are conserved and those which are still left sort of in decay. So yeah.
This is also a matter of it's a matter of larger concern in the city, and not only in the city of Tel Aviv. It's a matter of maintenance. Maintenance in Israel is something that is it has no authorities have little to no powers to enforce maintenance, long-term maintenance. The problem that old heritage buildings are facing is not like unique to them. It's quite a common problem to most residential buildings co-owned by multiple apartment holders or owners, because enforcement, like there are, for example, in New York, there's enforcement every 5, 6, 7 years. If you don't check your facades, then the city would come and bring all of its might and power on top of your shoulders to make sure that you either renovate your building or check your facade.
It's a law, no? It's like a federal law, which is not.
Yeah, it's not I don't think it's federal. I think it emanated from. There was a student that was walking in the 60s or in the 70s in one of the streets of New York, and I think a brick fell over her head and killed her. And this is how New York City introduced like a bylaw. Now a similar bylaw it can be found in Tel Aviv. I was actually one of the
buildings.
I was actually one of the people who drafted this bylaw. But the thing is, this bylaw allows the city to enforce its law every 7 years and make sure that people renovate their building. But people don't do it, and the enforcement is lacking. Whether or not it is in northern Tel Aviv or in the city center where you have heritage structures. So in the main, the problem is not unique to heritage problem. It's a social-cultural problem, if I could make that observation, and that's and the heritage buildings are the ones most affected.
Yeah, it's not your field. That's what you're saying. So that's fine. Let's go back to the economic. Just I want to understand from you, what do you think are the key factors that really make conservation so expensive, so that there's entrepreneurs suing the municipality that this sort of process is not the incentives are not high enough. Where are the pain points in the whole procedure which you can put your finger upon? Be brave.
I will be brave. But before, what you said before, it's exactly the last point I said. Why are buildings, some are conserved and some are not? Because those are not conserved. You should maybe take out the legal registration document, see how many owners in the building. Maybe there are protected tenants there, so it's not economically feasible. That's what I meant, because there are many different attributes for each building that can cause him to be conserved or not. Now for your brave question, the people or the amount of buildings that sued the municipality for compensation said the following. They said that if the building was not designated for conservation, I could have demolished the building. And unfortunately for Tel Aviv, they have an earlier plan that encouraged demolition of buildings. So if you demolish the building, you could build a little bit more, not much, but still you could build more. So you are staying with...
Because Tochnit Ravaim is giving the exact same amount of building.
No. I'm talking about, first of all, we are going to 2008, not today.
Okay.
The suing was in 2008, and then was Tochnit Mem. I'm talking about Mem.
Yes.
That encouraged demolition. So they said, I have an old building. If I can add floors, okay, but the building is old. Or otherwise, if not, I could demolish and build more development rights. And another thing is the conservation cost, that some say it's thousands more frontage square meter, and the municipality said it's 1,000 or something like this. These are I would say the main reasons.
Yes, but still, if you look around, most of those buildings are now almost in a process, no? Like, I mean, when I started doing the conservation with the conservation department, there were much less sort of buildings around Tel Aviv. I mean, it can be also building in general, but it seems to be working, the conservation.
One of the it's working, but one of the reasons is, because Tel Aviv is very expensive and prices are rising, so it's working, and it's working. And if we are so expensive, so maybe it's better to do this conservation, which are more prestige, even, and if people are willing to pay these prices.
Well, I'm wondering if prestigious means a better sort of renovation than other buildings. I mean, the quality. I'm talking about the quality because I think we also have this issue in Tel Aviv that a lot of times you see buildings that are renovated, and after a while they don't look as well as they did when they finished the renovation, because maybe of craftsmanship, because of lack of knowledge in the field. It can be there's no schools for renovation in Israel, one has to say. I mean, no official ones, perhaps private ones, but I'm really wondering if the prestigious goes with quality, because if it does, then it's okay, because we have to think long term. But if it's only prestigious, then I fear that it's sort of a bubble that, if you sort of pin it, then it explodes, because prestigious is something that is, I don't know, it can be debated, but gentrification doesn't mean that the quality of life in Tel Aviv for the next generation is going to get better, even if there's more apartments. So, I mean, this is a very big, large question, but I think they both affect the sort of tactical strategies we're doing when we're planning the city and how we renovate it or how we regenerate it.
I think I think the quality, is first of all maybe the most important things, because you have building, Bauhaus, there are 4,000 international style buildings. Some of them are designated, some of them are not. So,
right.
So I can imagine the quality and the branding of it, the quality and the cost of conserving, it makes the difference, or all of it makes the difference. But I'm looking at the rules that are set and trying to see, but what you're saying, of course, it's right. But
so, Nir, any thoughts from your side?
We're trying to stop the wheel, so to speak. But if you look at radical theorists of the city, and you look at planning theorists that look at heritage conservation, you see that heritage as an industry has a trajectory, and the trajectory is prestige / quality, means higher pricing, means developers, means capital pouring into the city, means gentrification, means displacement, means cost of living expands. This has been shown not only in Tel Aviv, it's a global phenomenon. The problem is not Tel Aviv's, it's a global problem. It's a global phenomena. Heritage has become a global phenomena and an international phenomena. Tel Aviv has taken upon itself these international and global writs, or actually conventions. As a city, it has embraced preservation. It has accepted the international treaties and their prescriptions. And as such, it is exposed to the global effects of heritage preservation. And the global effects means that, UNESCO is coming into town, drinking cocktails and eating whatever they're eating. And the trajectory is one. Now, if a city, including the Liebling House, is looking for ways to slow down the process and to maybe put it into a halt, this means that several things could be tried. Anti-gentrification measures. The one thing is allow people, to buy smaller apartments, as I said before. Another thing is maybe to use incentives in order to enable extra building rights in those structures, much more than the existing ones, to be shifted as affordable housing units into the city centers, which means that in this way you can
transfer of building rights onto buildings that are not listed.
Yeah, or into plots of land that are completely vacant or can be vacant in the future, which means that maybe you can transfer affordable housing units rights from a building which is earmarked for preservation to another building. Then again, we see international experience, like the one that I've shown in the Ryberg-Webster's research from the 2013, shows that heritage preservation does not tend to create affordable units. This process can be reversed, or we can look for ways to reverse this process in diverse ways, some of which I've just mentioned. Does it work, or can it work? I don't know. It is worth trying. But then again, if we look at the entire thing from a radical point of view or critical point of view, the process has already begun. There are ways to mitigate it, or at least to slow it down. I can think of other ways that the architect sitting here in the room can also help in doing this. But since this is a competition, I guess that I should stop here.
Yeah, it's the teaser, what you did, it's good. Yeah, I think really one of the things that Tel Aviv and other, metropolitans that are dealing with this sort of no more land are dealing with is our issues as such, as how to prevent gentrification, how to make the city have a big diversity of populations, how to, still provide housing, but maybe also think about mixed uses, and maybe also let spaces like the fifth facade be perhaps even a place not only for the dwellers themselves, but perhaps also for the community. So how to make a sense of community within a city is also something that we debate a lot. So I think from our conversation today, Eyal and Nir, a lot of sort of issues have been raised. I didn't expect to have any answers, but I really expected that we'll have all those issues coming out of our presentation. So thank you so much for doing that. I think we are in a state of time now in the planning procedures of the city, which is crucial, and the city understands it as well as the people who live here. So yes, I hope to see you again debating with us what can be done in Tel Aviv for the sake of also the people who live here. And yeah, thank you so much again for preparing this beautiful presentations and for this discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the invitation.